Welcome to a new podcast. This is Everything with Everett, a talk show podcast hosted by Everett McConaughey from Boise, Idaho. The purpose of this production is to share thoughts, voices, and information to further a discussion on who we are as individuals, communities, and a global presence. Everything with Everett is open to all topics of discussion: faith, religion, history, finances, and, well, everything. Follow, like, listen, and subscribe. Visit everettmcconaughey.com. Today's podcast is brought to you by Everett McConaughey. Was your family always capturing birthdays, weddings, the holidays, or even the kids' first recital on VHS tapes? Those are pretty precious and treasured memories, aren't they? Well, I was surprised to learn a few years ago that VHS tapes are not a timeless medium. In fact, they are reaching the questionable years of their usefulness and stability. VHS tapes can sit in storage for years, and depending on how they are stored or even how they were made, VHS tapes often decay under a process called tape rot. Don't lose your timeless memories and treasures to the mechanics of yesterday. Email Everett McConaughey at vhs@everettmcconaughey.com to learn more about how your tapes can be digitally recaptured and placed on a digital medium that can be shared with the relatives at your next family reunion or passed down for several more generations to enjoy. Hello everyone. Today I would like to discuss the Confederacy. And this is in light of, over the last year, we've been seeing a lot of correction and resistance to what the Confederacy represents. A lot of Confederate generals' statues have been removed. Now, we also need to keep in mind that these statues have not been around since the Civil War. They were put up in the 1960s, like 100 years after the Civil War. So to say that they truly honor those that fought for the Confederacy, first off, is not accurate because everyone was long dead by the time they got put up. And second, they were put up during the civil rights movements of the 60s. So let's take them as they are. They are a generational middle finger to people of color, and I'd like to discuss that in depth. Well, to a degree. So there's a post that I saw the other day that I was like, you know what, this is really, really good. And it was supposedly written by a person named Jim Golden. I say supposedly because I don't know for sure. The version that I'm reading was shared on Facebook publicly by a Natalie Johnson on June 30th, 2020. So I don't know when this Jim person wrote it, any connection to Natalie, whether, why wasn't it? Anyway, but it's all U.S. history-based information and facts that I feel need to be out there because it seems like one particular party or mindset that seems to be kind of still lingering in this country clearly did not pay attention during U.S. history. And one of my favorite classes was AP U.S. history in high school. Miss James Markle was my teacher. And I want to say, I think I even got college credit for that class through NNU. And I wanted to become a teacher back in the day, and I wanted to teach music, but the Boise State Music Department made it very clear to me that I was not one of their chosen peeps. So that dream got snuffed out over a vain 2-year process to try to show how much I enjoyed that. So my backup was another passion of mine. I was like, you know what, I could become an AP U.S. history teacher. And I love U.S. history. I love true U.S. history, not some legislated, whitewashed propaganda class. Like actual facts about what happened in our country, and how it impacted the lives and generations of everyone that's come since. So anyway, This is a really interesting article that I saw, and I'd like to share it with you now. All right. From someone who teaches AP US history. If you are confused as to why so many Americans are defending the Confederate flag, monuments, and statues right now, I put together a quick Q&A with questions from a hypothetical person with misconceptions and answers from my perspective as an AP US history teacher. Question: what did the Confederacy stand for? Well, the answer to that is, rather than interpreting, let's go directly to the words of the Confederacy's Vice President, Alexander Stephens. In his cornerstone speech on March 21st, 1861, he stated the Constitution rested upon the equality of races. This was an error. Our new government is founded upon exactly the opposite idea. Its foundations are laid, its cornerstone rests upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery's subordination to the superior race is his natural and normal condition. This is our new government. It is the first in the history of the world based upon this great physical, philosophical, and moral truth. That's the Confederacy, folks. Question: but people keep saying heritage, not hate. They think the purpose of the flag and monuments are to honor Confederate soldiers, right? The answer: the vast majority of the Confederate flags flying over government buildings in the South were first put up in the 1960s during the Civil Rights Movement. So, for the first 100 years after the Civil War ended, while relatives of those who fought in it were still alive, the Confederate flag wasn't much of a symbol at all. But when Martin Luther King Jr. and John Lewis were marching on Washington to get the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 passed, leaders in the South felt compelled to fly Confederate flags and put up monuments to honor people who had no living family members and had fought in a war that ended a century ago. Their purpose in doing this was to exhibit their displeasure with black people fighting for basic human rights that were guaranteed to them in the 14th and 15th Amendments, but being withheld by racist policies and practices. Another question: but if we take down Confederate statues and monuments, how will we teach about and remember the past? Monuments and statues pose little educational relevance, whereas museums, the rightful place for Confederate paraphernalia, can provide more educational opportunities for citizens to learn more about our country's history. The Civil War is important to learn about and will always loom large in social studies curriculum. Removing monuments from public places and putting them in museums allows us to avoid celebrating and honoring people who believe that tens of millions of black Americans should be legal property. Question: but what if the Confederate flag symbol means something different to me? The answer: individuals aren't able to change the meaning of symbols that have been defined by history. When I hang a Bucs flag outside my house, to me, the Bucs might represent the best NFL team. But to the outside world, they represent an awful NFL team, since they haven't won a playoff game in 18 years. I can't change the meaning for everyone who drives by my house because it has been established for the whole world to see. If a Confederate flag stands for generic rebellion or Southern pride to you, your personal interpretation forfeits any meaning once you display it publicly, as its meaning takes on the meaning it earned when a failed regime killed hundreds of thousands of Americans in an attempt to destroy America and keep black people enslaved forever. But my uncle posted a meme that said the Civil War and Confederacy was about states' rights and not slavery. The answer: States' rights to what? And in case you missed the fine print there, states' rights to enforce slavery and segregation and make people of color second-class citizens. Don't sidestep and call it states' rights in lieu of calling what it is slavery. Question. Everyone is offended about everything these days. Should we take everything down that offends anyone? The Confederacy literally existed to go against the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, and the idea that black people are human beings that deserve to live freely. If that doesn't upset or offend you, you are un-American. Taking these down goes against the First Amendment and freedom of speech, right? No. Anyone can do whatever they want to their private property, on their social media, etc. Taking these down in public or having private corporations like NASCAR ban them on their properties has literally nothing to do with the Bill of Rights. How can people claim to be patriotic while supporting a flag that stood for a group of insurgent failures who tried to permanently destroy America and killed 300,000 Americans in the process? The answer to that is simply no clue. Question. So, if I made a Confederate flag, my profile picture, or put a Confederate bumper sticker on my car, what am I declaring to my friends, family, and the world? Well, you're declaring that you support the Confederacy. To recap, the Confederacy stands for slavery, white supremacy, treason, failure, and a desire to permanently destroy selective history as it supports white supremacy. It is no coincidence and no accident you learned about Helen Keller instead of W.E.B. Du Bois. You learned about the Watts and L.A. riots, but not Tulsa or Wilmington. You learned that George Washington's dentures were made of wood rather than the teeth of slaves. You learned about black ghettos, but not Black Wall Street. You learned about the New Deal, but not redlining. You learned about Tommy Smith's fist in the air at the 1968 Olympics, but not that he was sent home the next day and stripped of his medals. You learned about black crime, but white criminals were never lumped together and discussed in terms of their race. You learned about states' rights as the cause of the Civil War, but not that slavery was mentioned 80 times in the Articles of Secession. Privilege is having history rewritten so that you don't have to acknowledge uncomfortable facts. Racism is perpetuated by people who refuse to learn or acknowledge this reality. You have a choice. Written by Jim Golden and shared by me, and I support every blessed word of that. And I think it's very critical to think about what we learn in our schools, what we teach our children. I don't think that we're a horrible country, but I know for a fact that we're not as godly and Christian as we would like those around the world to think that we are. Propaganda is something we think about, in Russia and North Korea, there and other countries that are, there's definitely anti-American propaganda where we are the bad figures out there. We are the bad people who break the religious laws. But there's also propaganda in our country. There's the propaganda that we do good. There's the propaganda that all of our activity in wars has been to liberate the oppressed, when in reality, Do we need to take down other leaders of other countries that just so conveniently had massive amounts of oil underground that we benefited from? There's propaganda in our own country. And I think, again, this is not an anti-America thing to think about. We all need to realize there's light propaganda and then there's heavy propaganda. And we all need to see our country and other countries with a heavy dose of reality and take it for what the facts say it is. Not every country that has communism is horrible, but it's also not great. And not every country that has capitalism is horrible, but it's also not great. Every religion claims to be right. Many religions claim others are wrong, but we just don't know. And I think that we need to come together and call things as they are. The Confederacy literally was started because it went against every single thing that the United States of America was founded on. They wanted to carry on something old. I honestly think that Britain had slavery, and so did we when we were the colonies. And under King George, I forget what number's after him, it became unpopular to have slaves, so Britain was getting rid of it. And unpopular opinion, but it's kind of supported by the layout of history if you actually do some reading. It kind of looks like part of the reason why we broke off and formed the United States of America was to continue that to some degree. We've always benefited from subsidized labor, known as slaves, that we went and kidnapped from Africa and brought them over here. Or we grabbed them from other locations once it was unpopular in Britain and brought them over here as well. They helped us have the manpower to build this country. And then when Britain was like, you know what, we're turning a new leaf, we need to get rid of slavery, America's like, whoa, we can't, continue without that. We need to stand up and support our own values. So we broke off, formed a country, and it wasn't just slavery. We did it because we wanted religious freedom. We wanted to have the right to have charges revealed against us. We didn't want to just be some weird government where you could just be thrown in jail and not know why you're sitting there and not have any rights to a fair trial and speedy and, get out of there. That's all good. I fully support all that. But the unspoken truth too is we were still addicted to slavery. It was profitable. It was a commodity that we could exchange and barter with. And then 100 years later, it really started to fall out of favor here. And the Confederates tried pulling an original move from 100 years ago. And they wanted to basically create another country. They wanted to create a Southern Confederate States of America because they wanted to keep slavery. And unfortunately, and diplomatically, we went to war and they lost. The Union won. And the law of the land for every state going forward was that black people, people of color, are humans. They have rights. But unfortunately, that whole thing continues on because people still didn't agree with it because they learned from their grandparents or they formed opinions themselves through childhood in the 1860s, early 1900s. And that's why it's so important what we teach our kids at home, not just what's at school. But if you teach your kids to hate people of another race or have inaccurate feelings about them, it may be true on some legitimate or psychotic level of your existence, but it can negatively impact future generations. And like water through the sands of time, it continues forward. And that is what perpetuates generational wealth, the generational disparity that Black people have. They don't have all the, legacies of what white people have. Like, you hear about like the Kennedys and stuff. And there's last name and the Vanderbilts and Rockefellers and, that's Steel Tycoon. What was his name? Anyway, you have names that stand through history and they're just recognized. There's still names that are in the game today. The Black people didn't have that because they spent hundreds of years in our country enslaved by white people without the legal ability to own property, without the legal ability to not have it taken away from them without cause and without breaking laws. That's what white privilege means. So, I always say if you're conservative, I know I don't have a conservative person listening because they're in their own little world of a rock. But if you hear the word white privilege and you think, oh, I don't have white privilege because I didn't have everything handed to me. Like, no, that's not what you were saying, you dumb idiot. White privilege, everyone has white privilege. That's not saying white people don't work hard for what they have. It's not saying that your grandparents and great-grandparents didn't struggle, were on the verge of death during the Great Depression and recessions and having to look for work. That's not it at all. Just universally, there was less handed down for the entire history of our country in the lines of Black people and people of color. Things were stripped from the Native Americans. Land was stripped from the Native people. Black people were enslaved and brought here. In World War II, the Japanese were stripped of their personal possessions, thrown into concentration camps. One of them here in Idaho, in Minidoka. They didn't have the ability to say, hey, I'm an American citizen. No, we just said, you know what? They might be sleeper agents. Let's throw them. They have no rights. They were plucked out of their houses. Their antiques that were handed down for generations were looted, sold, destroyed, what have you. They didn't get a check. They didn't get the government to say, hey, you know what? We did something wrong. Here's some money to compensate you. They lost farms. They lost businesses. They lost homes. They lost property, and they lost family members. And our country has a history of this. For the entire thing, we are racist to the core. I'm not saying you're racist, but you benefit from a racist system. If you live in America, you have white privilege. If you're not a person of color, if you're not indigenous. And that's what we need to be calling out. We build this wonderful land and go, oh, we have all this wonderful stuff because God gave it to us. We worked hard. And then people want to come here. And we say, oh, sorry, you need to apply for a visa. You need to do it the legal way, even though they are literally fleeing death and persecution. They are coming to the promised land. And those of us who supposedly walked for 40 days, 40 nights, and finally got in, now we're saying, oh, we're here. We built a wall. God gave it to us, but it's ours to say, you stop at the gate. That's America. We're racist. We've built on a racist system. The rich people are taking advantage of the working class. The working poor and the poor. If you're poor, people don't want you in their backyard, but they fail to realize they themselves could become an outcast through no fault of their own. They could get laid off. They could get priced out of rent. Guess what? It takes money to move. It takes money to get a shelter over your head. That's why it's easier to find a job when you have a job. It's easier to move when you have the income. Because if something happens and you don't have a safety net, or you don't think about what could happen, and the chair comes out from underneath you, those same neighbors that you saw in your church Sunday morning, very likely, and I wouldn't put it past any single one of them, very likely will look at you and say, not in my backyard. We're a judgmental country. And we all have a responsibility to identify that in ourselves, in others, in our communities, in our houses, in our circles, in our organizations. And we need to weed it out. We need to call it for what it is. And we need to make it truly go away. Not just some underground, like, oh, let's let it sit, hang out. Like, if we don't talk about it, it's gone. No, we need to extinguish this stuff. The generation that was born from 1920 to 1940, they went to World War II to fight fascism, to fight Nazis, to fight Hitler. Antifa is a movement. Antifa means anti-fascist. So can you like hear what the Republicans are saying right now when they're like, oh, Antifa did this? Like it's some organization, and like it's a bad thing. Like literally your grandparents or your parents fought against fascism. They're all flipping in their graves because you're sitting there saying, hey, maybe the Nazis had something right. If you're anti-Antifa, you're pro-Hitler. You're riding with Hitler, as a 1940 poster claimed. Antifa is a good thing. America is Antifa. So if you're not Antifa, then you're part of the Confederacy. And we fought against that too. And they lost. So we have a real class of people that think they won an election, even though they didn't. Think that they won the Civil War, but they didn't. And think they won World War II, but they didn't. That's mental illness. We need to call it out. We need to identify it. Aunts, uncles, cousins. If you identify with anything associated with Nazi Germany, the Confederacy, or fascism, you are on the wrong side of history. And I hope you learn that really quickly and really roughly from your family. Anyway, it's just so invigorating and frustrating that we have all this history that just proves where we've been. That is the danger. It's not, oh, if we don't know history, we're doomed to repeat itself. We're already repeating it, and the history's there. So those that say, oh, well, if we remove the monuments, then, you're actually, by defending the monuments, you're actually repeating history. You're part of repeating history. So check yourself, I guess. Anyway, that is my take on the Confederacy, something awesome that I wanted to share with you guys. And just so that you know, new website, you can get to the podcast if everettmcconaughey.com is hard for you to phonetically spell out or find. You can now go to everettpodcast.com. everettmcconaughey.com still works, but if you go to everettpodcast.com, that takes you to the website. If you click on the podcast link up at the top, that takes you to podcast.everettmcconaughey.com, so you don't have to remember spelling everything out. And I didn't want to break that link because everything that we've shared in the past, and if you are used to finding everettmcconaughey.com, I didn't want to take that away either. So if you haven't been to the website and you're like, how do I spell everettmcconaughey.com? Now you can go to everettpodcast.com and find all the links to everything that we've got, socials, Twitter, Facebook, email. If you have something to say, I'd love to hear from you. you can send a text message, or you can call and it goes straight to voicemail. Leave a message. Let me know what's on your mind. 208-391-2808. You can also send me an email. It's at mystory, one word, mystory, at everettpodcast.com. So let me know what your thoughts are on anything. Any podcast. I want to hear from you. This is your space to have a voice as well. And with that, I appreciate spending some more of your time. Hope you have a great day, and I will talk to you next time. Thank you for listening. Join the conversation. Send a text message or leave a voicemail at 208-391-2808. Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and several podcasting platforms. All the information at everettmcconaughey.com.